in the majestic wings of the Scholarium, where ancient scripts and arcane knowledge converge, a new breed of protector emerges. The Scholarium Sentinel is a formidable master scriber knight who embodies both scholarly wisdom and martial prowess, seamlessly blending the meticulous craft of scribe skills with the underlying might of a sentinel knight. This fusion creates an indomitable force ready to stand against any threat in Tamriel. Hello everyone and welcome to the Tank Club. This build, the Scholarium Sentinel, is designed to be playable on all classes and utilises a one-bar setup, making extensive use of the new Scribing System. This is so we can pack a lot more into fewer abilities. The aim is to create a simple yet effective tank build that helps players ease into tanking. This build offers both accessibility and simplicity, making it appealing to a wide range of players. While it is equipped with everything you need to tank effectively in ESO, it is not recommended for harder endgame content. In more challenging scenarios such as veteran or hard mode dungeons and trials, you may be required to provide additional utility to your group. At this point, the one-bar setup may be limiting. Nevertheless, we have worked diligently to ensure that this build, despite its single-bar design, is packed with numerous buffs and debuffs to help you tank effectively and offer significant group benefits. For this build, we are using the Nord race, and this is because it provides the best utility for this build, with the 2600 increased resistances, which helps us reach the resistance cap. Additionally, Nords offer 1500 max stamina and 1000 max health. They also generate 5 ultimate every 10 seconds when taking damage. Our Munda Stone is the Atronach, and this is used because it will provide an increase of 535 magicka recovery when we pair it with full Divine's gear. So it's really essential to have really high magicka recovery for this build because everything we're going to be doing will cost magicka. That also feeds into the next part, which is our food, and we're going with Red Frothgar. This food gives us a significant boost to our max health and, more critically, the increase of 451 additional magicka recovery. With the potions, we are using those Essence of Health Tri-Stat potions. These are going to give us that major fortitude, intellect and endurance, boosting all recoveries, which we really need. And also, the potions restore a substantial amount of health, magicka and stamina. Next, we're going to take a look at all of the gear that this build is going to use, and we start off with the monster set. Now, we are going to be using Magma Incarnate One Piece. You could also use Baron Thirsk, which provides the same one piece as well, and some people might find that one easier to obtain. But this is just going to give us increased magicka recovery and stamina recovery, and we're only going to be using this for the one piece. So it's a great little set to use to get that benefit. So the first 5-piece set we're going to use is Turning Tide. This gives us some really nice benefits with increased max health, max stamina, a second max health buff, and then when you block, you gain Flowing Water for 10 seconds, causing your next bash attack to deal magic damage to up to 6 enemies in a 5x10 meter line, and you apply that major vulnerability for 10 seconds. This is a huge debuff to enemies, which will increase the group's DPS. Turning Tide is a set that we've selected because of its ease to proc. Simply bash the enemy after blocking a hit, and it's one of the strongest tank sets in the game, offering a real significant group benefit. We pair this with another 5-piece, which is Crimson Oath's Rive, another really strong set. We are going to get increased armor, we're going to get max health, and we're going to get more armor again. Armor means spell and physical resistance, so it really buffs us up quite nicely. We then also get the 5-piece bonus, which is while you are in combat, casting an ability, drinking a potion, or using a poison that applies a major or minor buff to yourself or an ally, sends out a wave of energy that reduces the armor of nearby enemies within 12 meters by 3, 5, 4, 1 for 15 seconds, and you can do this every 12 seconds. So with Crimson Oath, this set is chosen for its simplicity in proccing. It's very easy to use. The extra penetration it provides is very useful for the group, and it compensates for the loss of the Ice Staff Infused Crusher. It also offers a substantial armor benefit, which gets us to the resistance cap. The next piece of gear we use is the Oaken Soul Ring. This is again another important part of the build because we are using one bar. So that does mean we are kind of limited on the skills we can slot. and it doesn't give us a lot of opportunity or a lot of space to have skills that are giving us things like different buffs and benefits. So we utilize the Oaken Soul Ring, which allows us to stay on 1 bar, but also gives us some really significant benefits as well. This is a mythic item. It's not extremely easy to obtain. It will take a little bit of time, but it's well worth it. While equipped, you're unable to swap bar, and then we gain Minor Berserk, Minor Courage, Major Brutality, Major Sorcery, Major Prophecy, Major Savagery, Minor Force, Minor Protection, Major Resolve, Minor Mending, Minor Fortitude, Minor Intellect, Minor Endurance, Minor Heroism, Minor Slayer, Minor Aegis, and Empower. So it's packed with lots and lots of things, and some of those things in there are really useful for tanking, especially things like Minor Protection, Major Resolve, Minor Mending. All of the buffs to our recoveries as well are all super useful. So there are lots of benefits in there that we're going to be able to use as a tank, and it means we don't need to slot skills that provide these buffs as well. Now, because we are using that mythic item, we weren't able to use a full monster set, so that's why we're just using the one piece to go with this. You can turn this build into a more easy mode build, and you would do that by switching the gear sets to Pearlescent Ward and Saxial Champion, or Lucent Echoes. And what this will allow you to do is play without any gear set proccing. So my preferred option is something with proc sets, but if you wanted to go for something that is more easy mode, then definitely take this option instead. Now for the gear, we are using a 6 heavy and 1 medium or light. I've personally gone for medium to get the medium armor benefits, and that's on the monster set. We don't really have a choice on the heavy armor because we are using 5 Crimson and 5 Turning Tide, so there isn't really much option there. You have to use 6 heavy. So we are doing that. You can use light armor if you'd prefer, but because we've already got so much magical recovery already with this build, I am not using that. I'm going with the medium to kind of reduce the cost of dodge roll and little bits like that, so I've gone with that. On the gear, I am using full Divines. That's so we can buff up our Atronach Munderstone, which is a real critical point of this build. And for the enchants, always going with those multi-effect enchants is the best option. On the small pieces, you can change those if you don't have the money to spend on the multi-effect enchants, but they are going to give you the most overall benefit in total stats. You could always switch these to a single stat if you want something that's a bit more cost effective. For the jewelry, I've gone with 3 infused with Magicka Recovery. This is going to give us an absolute ton of Magicka Recovery. The only thing I would do here is I would potentially change to Harmony if I'm in a group where I've got lots of synergies. So if I've got a couple of friends that are providing some good synergies, then obviously do that. If you're not going to be doing that, if you're with random groups, then Infused is going to be the better option. For my one-handed weapon, just to kind of cover that gap a little bit, I'm using an Infused Crusher. It is weaker than using it on an Ice Staff, but it's better than not having one at all. Obviously combined with Crimson Oath and Major and Minor Breach, we are still offering a pretty decent amount of group pen. Let's take a look at our character stats. The only thing we can really do to buff up here is use a potion. And when we look at the screen there, obviously the main highlights, 33k spell and physical resistance. We've got 3,429 Magicka Recovery, and then our max health just at 38.4k almost. So next we're going to take a look at the skills, and this is a scribing build predominantly. But we're also going to use a bit of class skill in there because we don't want to miss out on all the important buffs that we can get from our class skills. So our first skill is Leashing Soul. This is basically used as a magic damage. It's going to do a taunt. It's going to pull enemies to you. We're also going to get 1,000 Magicka and 1,000 stamina back. And then it's also going to apply Major Breach to enemies that get pulled in. So a really, really useful skill. And this is going to be used as our main taunt as well. The only trouble you do have there is that because we're using it as a taunt skill, you can only use it on enemies that haven't been taunted already. So it does mean when you're on a boss fight, you are going to have to recast this exactly as it expires to make sure that you maintain taunt on a boss. So that is a little thing that you have to worry about, but I wanted to make something that was very well rounded and packed with skills that have useful benefits. So that's why we are planning to do it that way. The next skill is Binding Burst. So this again is going to be doing a range of different things. It's going to cost Magicka. It's going to immobilize enemies for 3 seconds, and it's got that 8-meter radius in there. It's also then going to reduce the movement speed of enemies. So we're going to have the immobilize plus a snare to slow enemies down when they get pulled in, so then they don't run off. Alongside that, we've also got Minor Breach. So enemies get afflicted with Minor Breach for 20 seconds, reducing their physical and spell resistance by 2,974. So within these 2 skills, we've got a pull, we've got a resource management tool, we've got Major and Minor Breach, we've got a snare, and we've got an immobilize, and that's all packed into just 2 skills. Next, we've got Warden Contingency. So we use this skill, and what you have to do is, it's an awkward skill because you cast it, and then when you cast another skill, it will trigger the effect of the skill. So it's going to grant a damage shield to you and allies that absorbs 10,000 damage for 8 seconds. So it's a group damage shield, but also a damage shield for you. It scales off max health, which is really nice. It then will place a rune on the ground for 10 seconds. And the reason we do that is because anything inside that rune will then be afflicted by minor vulnerability for 22 seconds, increasing damage taken by 5%. That will also stack with the major vulnerability that we're going to be applying with the Turning Tide set. So we've got major and minor vulnerability with really, really good uptimes. The next one is Magical Throw. So this is a one-hand and shield skill. We're going to throw our shield at the enemy. What this is going to do is, I've used the magic version of this. So there's only one way to get this to cost magicka, and it's to put magic damage on there. So it's going to be a decent damage skill. It's then going to heal for 5,000 health on return. This does get buffed up because we are going to have a few different healing buffs in there, but also it can crit, and also it pairs really well with having this huge damage shield. So we've got this big damage shield, and then we've got this heal. And to go alongside that, it's going to also apply Major Maim for 10 seconds to enemies, reducing their damage done. So we're going to get that magic costing skill that heals and then applies another big debuff to enemies, which means you're going to be taking less damage. Now for the final skill, this is really difficult because it's hard to find a useful skill to slot in the last position. Through the Scribing Skills, there isn't anything that really stands out as something that you must use, but we do need to use a skill that is a class skill so we can benefit from some class passives. But then we also need to think about a skill that actually provides a buff when you cast it. We can't proc Crimson Oath with any of these scribe skills because we haven't got any buffs on there, they're all debuffs. So we need a buff skill that provides you with a buff that can proc Crimson Oath and give you some class passives and benefits. So for the Arcanist in particular, we've got Xena's Empowering Disc. Now the problem with this is all of the buffs that you're providing don't actually benefit you because you've already got all of these effects: minor courage, minor fortitude, intellect and endurance. You've already got all those because of the Oaken Soul Ring. However, because you do use this particular skill, when you cast it, it will immediately proc Crimson Oath. Now one of the things that is beneficial by using this is your class passives. So because of your class passives, you will get intricate rune forms. You will obviously benefit from all of your different passives here. We do miss out on this armor from this skill, but we're already at the resistance cap anyway, so it's not a big loss. We don't get any additional benefit by using this either, but if you wanted to switch a skill and use something else instead of this one, then you can. You could use something like Rune Guard of Freedom to proc Crimson Oath. We've already got minor protection, so that wouldn't be useful, but it will give you another heal and it would give you group minor resolve, so it's something you could use. We do get the benefit of this group buff minor evasion as well because casting an Arcanist ability is any Arcanist ability, so Xena's Empowering Disc would proc that one. So that is my personal choice for this build. And you've got to remember as well, Xena's Empowering Disc is the same as wearing another gear set. So by using this skill and giving your group minor courage, it's as if you're wearing another gear set in a way, because it means you're kind of wearing the Claw of Yolnahkrin set as well as the gear set you're already wearing, because you're providing basically that same buff. So it's a good thing to have because it is essentially another gear set being used. We do also have options for this last skill for every class. So for the Dragonknight, you would use Igneous Shield. Despite having a group shield with Warden Contingency, this choice is essential for several reasons. We need a self-buffing skill to proc our Crimson Oath set. Igneous Shield not only provides a personal buff, granting major mending, which enhances our healing, but also offers an additional self and group shield. Moreover, it triggers the Mountain's Blessing passive, it grants minor brutality as a group buff, you gain additional ultimate, and in addition to that, the Helping Hands passive is activated that provides 1120 stamina each time Igneous Shield is cast. So that is a really strong option. Alternatively to that, you could use Igneous Weapons. Necromancers pose a significant challenge when trying to find a single useful skill that provides a self buff, as most necro tanking skills lack this feature. It's surprising actually. Since we don't need major resolve, which is one of the few buffs built into the class, the necro doesn't actually have any unique group buffs, so then we need to choose a skill that offers any beneficial effect. This leads us to Deaden Pain. Now while not as effective as the other morph, it is one of the few semi-useful self-buffing skills that's available on a necro. However, it can be difficult to proc this on bosses as it requires consuming corpses to activate the buff, which in turn procs the Crimson Oath gear set. So alternatively, you could use something more reliable like Resolving Vigor on bosses. For the Nightblade, Mirage is an excellent option as it provides major evasion and minor resolve and reduces the cost of dodge roll. Additionally, it grants access to the Hemorrhage passive, which applies the group buff minus savagery, offering further group benefits. This skill also helps by proccing that Crimson Oath set. As a sorcerer, the only truly worthwhile option is Dark Deal. This skill activates the Exploitation passive, providing the Minor Prophecy group buff. Additionally, it is an excellent sustain tool using Magicka to heal you and grants a burst of stamina along with stamina over time. Crucially, it applies to self buffs essential for proccing that Crimson Oath. However, be mindful that this skill has a channel time, which will make you drop block, so definitely avoid casting it when you're about to be hit by a heavy attack or mechanic. For the Templar, it's impossible to proc the unique class buff of minor sorcery while also using a skill that provides a self buff, as none of the Dawnwrath skills include any major or minor self buffs. Radiant Aura is chosen because it gives both a group buff and a self buff, which is essential for proccing Crimson. Although this skill may be somewhat redundant for the tank due to overlapping buffs, it remains beneficial for the group and necessary for the gear proc. A Warden has a few good options for the skills that can be used here. Firstly, Enchanted Growth provides an additional heal that procs the Warden's unique group buff minor toughness, which increases max health of you and your group members. This skill also grants minor intellect and endurance, which helps proc Crimson Oath. Although you already benefit from these buffs, you can still provide them to your group. Alternatively, Bullnetch is a solid self-sustained tool which grants the Flourish passive, increasing your Magicka and stamina recovery. It also gives you stamina over time from the skill itself, and it will give you a couple of buffs that will proc Crimson Oath. Onto the champion points, and we've got a pretty standard setup here for our blue CP. We've got the Duelist rebuff, Enduring Resolve, Bulwark, and then we've got Ironclad. We use those because those are all the best ones that we can use for a tank, and then obviously we pair those with things like Elemental Aegis, Preparation, Hardy, and everything else that doesn't need to be slotted. On the fitness CP, again, a pretty standardized setup of Boundless Vitality, Fortified, Rejuvenation, and then we've also got this one here, Bracing Anchor. So again, very standard. We want to use all of the CP that will give us benefits without needing to be slotted again. Now, because we are using a damage shield skill, you could alternatively use something like Shield Master or Bastion and Bastion. If you didn't quite need maybe the Fortified, maybe you're willing to drop 1700 armor because we are at the resistance cap. You could drop it a little bit depending on the content. It won't be as important to actually hit the resistance cap for everything other than the newer content. Rejuvenation is only given a tiny amount of recovery, so you might think that you don't need that 90, so you might as well take something that's going to reduce the cost of your damage shield instead. So those are optional champion points as well. So we need to have a little look at how we create the skills that I've made for this build. And we do this by going to the Scribing altar and crafting these skills ourselves. So our first one here, Shield Throw. So with Shield Throw, you're going to need that magic damage. You're going to need to take the Sage's Remedy as well, which is going to add in that healing. And then we take the main perk as well. So that is going to create that magical throw with all those effects that I showed you before. For Soul Burst, we go with that Immobilize. Then want to take Hunter's Snare for that movement speed reduction, and then Breach as well to apply that minor breach. On Wield Soul, we have got Pull, obviously to pull and taunt enemies. You've got Druid's Resurgence, which is really essential for this, restoring Magicka and stamina. So if you've got an enemy that doesn't get chained in, maybe they're already CC immune, you're going to get 1000 stamina and Magicka back. So this skill costs 3780 Magicka, but then you're going to restore 1000 of that Magicka, so it's only actually costing 2780, but then you get the additional stamina. So what this does also is it turns this skill into a sustain tool. So we've got so much Magicka, and one of the reasons for that is if you're really struggling to sustain, all you need to do is spam this skill. You can essentially spam this skill once every second and you'll get 1000 stamina back. So you've got no reason to ever really struggle for sustain, especially on those boss fights where you might have to block for prolonged periods of time, because you can just cast this and it will proc that alongside proccing the major breach. So you do need to cast this once every 10 seconds on bosses regardless, because we go with that breach effect. Druid's Resurgence is such a strong script to get on this skill because those resources are huge. That 1000 stamina means that you can just keep using this skill to gain resources back, so it's a fantastic resource tool alongside everything else that it does. Next we've got Contingency, and on this skill we go with Damage Shield. We then go with Growing Impact to place that rune on the ground, and then combine that with vulnerability for the minor vulnerability, because we've pretty much got everything else that's listed in this list. So there isn't really anything else that's useful there. So we go with that minor vulnerability. Now, obviously, you're welcome to customize these spells slightly differently. Because they are customizable, it doesn't mean you have to follow this 100%. If there's something else that you wanted to get instead, then that is more than plausible. Maybe you wanted to go with Major Vitality instead of something else, or you wanted to go with a different effect. That is absolutely possible. Maybe you're willing to spend a bit of stamina on a skill, in which point you wouldn't need the magic damage one to make it and force it into being a magic skill. So there's lots of different ways you can customize the spells for this build. So we're going to look at how to play this build, and this build is designed to be simple and accessible. So this is going to be a general rotation to follow to activate everything effectively. So for add pulls, you want to move towards the enemy and cast Contingency for the damage shield and AoE just before you reach them. This will proc when you cast your next skill. So it doesn't proc when you cast it, it procs when you use the next skill. You then want to use Soul Burst to immobilize the melee enemies close to you and the ones that are inside the AoE we've placed with Contingency. You then want to use Wield Soul to start chaining enemies, debuff them and taunt them. So that'll pull them into you on top of the AoE, and it will just make them be caused with a huge debuff. You then use Soul Burst again to crowd control the enemies that you've just chained in. Next, you block to gain Flowing Water from Turning Tide, and then you bash to proc it within 10 seconds. Use your class skill to then proc Crimson Oath because everything's stacked in, and then use Contingency and then Shield Throw for survival as and when needed, and Wield Soul for stamina sustain when that's needed as well. When we move on to bosses, you want to initiate combat with a boss using Wield Soul to taunt and debuff it. Proc Turning Tide by blocking a hit and then bashing. You then proc Crimson Oath by using your class skill. Ensure the bosses are positioned correctly and then use your Contingency skill. Proceed to debuff the boss by using Wield Soul and Shield Throw, and just continue to apply your skills and proc your gear on cooldown. And again, you would use Contingency, Shield Throw for survival, and you can spam Wield Soul when you're not doing anything else. When all your skills are on cooldown and you need some stamina, maybe you're blocking, use Wield Soul to gain that stamina back if needed. So that is everything for this Scholarium Sentinel one-bar tank build for Gold Road. I hope you enjoyed the build. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Huge thank you to all of our Patreon supporters, our YouTube members, and everyone who supports the Tank Club's content. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye for now.